So it's great that that football team has the job briefing, their game plan ahead of time. But to me, what's more important is as the game changes, as your work sites do, is that we're constantly having those huddles. Here's what we're going to do at this pole, at this house, at this structure for the next 5-10 minutes. Here's all the materials, equipment we need. Here's where you're going to stand. Here's where I'm going to stand. And those can become very powerful discussions.
Hey, and welcome to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, John Travis, and today I'm speaking with David McPeak. David is the Director of Professional Development at UBM, and he's also the author of a couple of books, which I'm hoping to get into today. David, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
It's great. Just to kind of get the ball rolling, I like to give people a bit of a background on maybe where how you got started in the industry and sort of what led you to writing the couple of books that you did and kind of where you are today. So
So in my current role, Director of Education and Professional Development at the Incident Prevention Institute of Utility Business Media. We're a company that provides education and information targeted at the utility industry, largely focused on really three things: leadership, human performance, and safety. So I, like most people that work in safety, never had aspirations or ambitions to work in safety, kind of got appointed there, worked for a large electrical contractor in the industry and actually in their fleet department. And one of those, my boss got promoted and kind of appointed me, whatever you want to say, to safety. And as roles and responsibilities there progressed and started doing training, really found a niche with that and a passion, especially for training frontline leaders in the field. And everybody's a leader through either influence or authority, and having an impact there.
Was there anything, because I feel like I got into safety almost the same way. I was working at a mining company. I was an electrical engineer. The manager's looking around going, "No, you're an electrical guy. Why don't you start looking into electrical safety?" And that's sort of how I got started. But there was, over time, what I was going to ask you is, can you remember, was there a switch almost that flipped for you when you were like, man, this is something that's really important that I want? Is there anything that kind of triggered that, or did it just sort of happen naturally over time?
It mostly happened naturally over time. There were a few moments, and I think it's more where you actually see the impact that safety has on people, especially in a positive way. A lot of times I think we focus too much on people that got hurt or major incidents that happened, and that's our motivation for safety. What really motivated me was seeing, whether it was programs or training or whatever it was, and people actually using them and talking about the benefit they had from it. And then especially as you train leaders, to see how they train other people. And so that for me maybe was the main motivation. And then a couple of times too, I remember sitting in training classes that I wasn't conducting and watching the trainer and the impact they were having on the group. And like, wow, one day I would love to be that. And so that was more for me than what typically we think of as safety, which is something really bad happened, we got to fix it. Here's something that's good. How can we make it better?
Yeah, well, that's good. Now, obviously, is it your first book, which is Frontline Leadership?
Yes. And yeah, Frontline Leadership, The Hurdle. And I love that title because when you think about, and when we present it in groups and whatnot, the thing we do and The Hurdle is the title of actually both books. One's Frontline Leadership, The Hurdle. One's Frontline Incident Prevention, talking about safety, The Hurdle. But when you think about leadership and things that are difficult about leadership, things like having difficult conversations, things like leading change, whether it's regulatory standards or whatever, providing people coaching and feedback, a whole lot of things around culture and getting people aligned and whatnot. I like to say each one of those things is a hurdle. And if you think about track and field and the image of a hurdle, and if you just stood there and try to jump over it, that's almost an impossible thing to do. So what's really important is the run up. And so that whole book is focused on the run up, which is defined as creating culture and developing relationships. The better you
Mhm.
do those two things, I'm not saying it's easier, but you get the run up. Well, I am saying it's easier. The better you get the run up, creating culture, developing relationships, much easier to get over those hurdles. So you can then have some of those conversations. The coaching and feedback part of it, the leading change part of it, the communication gaps that tend to occur. A lot of those things go away because if we invest our time in, again, creating culture, developing relationships, so that's the focus of that book, really.
Yeah. So let me ask you, like, because this is something that you hear a lot about, and I still get the feeling that a lot of people don't get it, and so you're placed into a role where you're a supervisor, and I think probably the first thing you don't realize is you're now a leader as well, right? And so there's a bit of a transition there, and then the next one would be once you start thinking about safety, like it's just not this extra thing that's on your list of things to do. But could you talk a little bit about, to help people sort of make that connection of how safety is tied to leadership and how those two things are kind of almost, well, not one and the same, but you need leadership in order to have safety.
Absolutely. And you hit a lot of things there. And we have, I guess you'd call it our premier training program is called Frontline. And the reason for that is targeted at frontline supervisors. So in construction in general, and especially in the utility industry, I find a lot of times the promotional practices are I am technician, task specific, whatever, alignment, topped out, really good at that technical task.
Hmm.
So I get promoted to something called a four-person or a crew leader. Different companies call them different things. And essentially, the training that people get for that, and it sounds kind of funny to say, but sadly it's true, is here's a different colored hard hat, a computer, and the keys to your truck. Good luck.
Yeah.
And they don't get a lot of training, especially with safety, but also with leadership. And so you have sort of a popularity bias there, which is now I'm leading these people that used to be my peers. I still want them to like me. And we talk
Hmm.
a lot about the difference between liking and caring and how caring has to trump liking. Caring being defined as preventing harm and encouraging growth. And then the safety part of it, just the basic skills around that. And in that environment, what I find is a lot of people really gravitate towards autocratic kind of, well, one or two things. It's autocratic leadership, just telling people what to do, which nobody likes to follow rules. And unfortunately, with safety,
Hmm.
we tend to do that a lot. Or back to the popularity bias, a whole lot more of a real hands-off goal setting approach and just letting everybody do what they want. And so that I think in terms of leadership is really important that people have the skills. And a lot of times you see when people either take in leadership positions either incorrect or just not any action at all, it's not because necessarily they don't want to, it's because they don't know how to.
Yeah.
And so I think the more we can enhance those leadership skills, the more people tend to lead safety because in the safety, just like anything else, has to be led, and it is led. Now, whether it's led in a good way or a bad way, and who's leading it, but everybody has some combination of influence and authority. So when you first started out, you had the influence. Everybody has influence over each other with their peers, and that's really where you get safety right is more peer to peer stuff than organizational leadership to
Right.
workers kind of thing. So
Yeah.
those are the skills and the things that we try to focus on.
Yeah. So when you talk about safety culture, like, is that where you're getting more into that peer to peer? Now everybody's kind of pulling the same way, or what do you mean by?
When you think about safety culture, I tend to think about a couple of things. Number one, how often do near misses and near hits get reported? And number two, how do people react when somebody goes to do a job site observation? Now, I think those
Mhm.
are two of the leading indicators of what kind of safety culture you have. And you could kind of combine those and really say this, and it's a question I ask people a lot. How comfortable are we communicating with each other? How comfortable am I if I see you not wearing your safety glasses or your hard hat? Simple example to say, John, you need to do this, and here's
Mhm.
why, and encourage you to do that. How comfortable are you if you make a mistake or an error, voluntarily reporting that to me, to the organization, to the group? Because the reality of it is, I don't care how big your safety staff is. I don't care how many general foremen and supervisors and managers and whatever all those titles are. At the end of the day, in construction and especially in utilities, that crew and that group is there 90 to 95% of the time with no supervision. And so getting them to understand how to work together, how to get safety right, getting that crew leader to understand their role and the impact that they have, that to me is of paramount importance.
Mhm. Oh, that's great. So, um, now you mentioned there's a workbook earlier when we were chatting, and I noticed on the title of that it says the art of safety. Now, is that something? That made me think. What's the art of safety? Can you kind of delve into that one a little bit?
Yes, yes, yes. I love the concept of the art of safety because eh, safety is an art and a science. The science part of it, and think about how good we are at this. Think about the quality of protective equipment we have. We have vehicles that will stop themselves, collision avoidance systems. When in the utility industry somebody's climbing, they wear 100% fall protection. Theoretically, they can't fall. When I'm using sharp objects with my hands, I have cut resistant gloves. You think about the monitoring technology we have, whether it's in a manhole for the atmosphere or working around electricity and voltage detectors. I mean, we are really, really good at the science of safety and getting better. I joke with people all the time, but think about taking a piece of equipment that lifts things like a crane, for instance. If it was manufactured in the last year or two, let's call it, I'm I, I'm careful not to say it would be impossible for us to, but it would be really difficult even trying to turn that thing over. It's got so many
Mm.
safety features and devices on it. The science of safety. So the art of safety then is about understanding, leading, developing, and protecting people, including yourself. And it really incorporates the human factor into it, which is something I think we leave out a lot. And I
Mm.
have a pretty fascinating keynote speech I do that's called "Lead People, Not Robots," and it really tends to resonate well with people. Is
Yeah.
we tend to kind of create unintentionally, actually with very good intentions. People work out a habit pattern. We micromanage them. We think that because we've got perfect programs and done perfect training on our perfect programs, people are always going to perform perfectly. All those kind of things, and so it's kind of the art of safety starts with really leading and interacting with people, not how they are and not how we wish they were. We wish that other people were perfect. We wish that other people were like us. They're not. And once we can understand that and the first principle of human performance, people are fallible, even the best make mistakes, we can really start to encourage people to protect themselves from hazards rather than forcing them to follow rules. And along with that, not to over rely so much on all that great protective equipment we were just talking about a minute ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the next thing I was thinking about was human performance. You mentioned that earlier. And that's another one I find that a lot of safety people seem to be talking about it. But when I'm talking to other people, maybe they don't quite understand what human performance is and how it relates to safety. So could you just briefly kind of give us an overview on what is human performance all about when it comes to safety?
Yeah, I think that it's really good. So, 15, 20 years ago, most people didn't really understand leadership. Most safety cultures were very punitive kind of thing. We got better at that. And then 10 to 15 years ago, depending on the organization, people started to see the importance of human performance. And a lot of people do different things with that. There's an aspect of human performance where you think about human performance improvement. I need to read X number of books on this subject, or I need to do this many assessments and whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the part of human performance is that we try to stress is more the human factor, and the fact that, again, if you think about the way I like to explain it, because I do think a lot of people, I won't say ruin human performance, but there's a couple of things about it. Number one, if your culture's not right, human performance won't work. And then number two, a lot of times people, I think, overcomplicate. And so that's where we came up with that concept of lead people, not robots. If I tell a robot to do something, in other words, I program it, what's it going to do? Exactly what I programmed it to do. It's
Mhm.
probably not going to make mistakes. If it does, I'm going to have to fix that robot. If I tell a person to do something, on the other hand, they're immediately making a whole lot of judgments about what they're going to do with my instruction, so to speak, based on their experience with me, based on their experience with whatever message or instruction I'm sending. They are subject to things like time pressure, peer pressure, risk tolerance, complacency, normalization, deviation, all those kind of words. They get distracted. And so I think, again, unintentionally, 10, 15 years ago, we just thought that if we really did a good job with safety, people would be perfect, and nothing bad would happen. The reality of it is, I mean, look at most studies. Most of them say somewhere 80 to 90% of incidents are caused by human error.
Mm.
And we spend almost 100% of our time trying to fix everything but human error. And so it's not about fixing human error. I probably shouldn't have said that, because people are going to make mistakes.
Right.
Caveat to that, if you use human performance tools well and you make it task specific, and you say, for especially a critical task, here's what we're doing for the next 5 minutes. Here's how we're going to make sure we're perfect and protected for the next 5 minutes. We can accomplish that. But if we just base it on the fact that nobody's going to make mistakes, ourselves included, overconfidence, those sort of things, that's when things tend to go wrong. So really incorporating truly the human factor and understanding decision making and what goes into it, that, in my opinion, is how we can have the biggest impact on, from a leadership perspective, culture, and from a safety perspective, protecting people.
Right. So, okay. So we talk about human performance. We acknowledge that humans are going to make errors, no matter how many systems we have in place or the PPE we have or all that stuff. What are some things we can do now, recognizing that humans are going to make errors, to get better at not making errors?
Depending on the work, teamwork is a huge part of that. Because sometimes if I'm really subject to, for instance, to being complacent at a given task, what looks normal and safe to me, if somebody else is observing me doing it and they're comfortable again communicating with me, they might could help me understand my level of risk tolerance. Because here's the thing, hazards don't care, and we think they do. And what I mean by that, and this is really fascinating to think of it this way. So let's take a chainsaw. I'm operating a chainsaw. If I've done that for 30 years, it's easy enough for me to start to think, well, I've gotten so good at this chainsaw can't hurt me. The chainsaw doesn't look back at its operator and say, it doesn't make judgments, right? It's not saying, oh, Dave's
Mhm.
got 30 years of experience operating me, I can't hurt him. John, it's the first time he's ever done it, I'm going to hurt him. And we start to think about like things like the example I love to use. If you take some of the us versus them mentalities we have, whether it's workers versus management or whatever else, if you take a frontline worker and somebody from management and they both touch an energized power line at the same time, who gets electrocuted first? Electricity doesn't care. The hazard doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
We care. So teamwork is part of that. But I think really more just understanding the things like error precursors. When we identify, okay, I'm under time pressure right now. And sometimes there are things we can do to eliminate that time pressure. Sometimes there's things we can't. And if the time pressure's still there, then how do we plan for hazards, right? We identify hazards well, and we mitigate hazards pretty good. We don't plan for and mitigate the words we're talking about right now: time pressure, complacency, those sort of things. So I think that if we incorporate that into the work planning, give people some of the human performance tools like a self-check, stop, think, act, review, that's where you can really have a significant impact on it. And I like to was thinking about time pressure, an example I love to use. And it's funny how many people do this is so you're out of town somewhere you've never been before and you get your phone out and you pop up Google Maps, Apple Maps, Waze, whatever it is you use, and you get some directions and it gives you an estimated time of arrival. Do you at that point in time view that as a competition? And I think that the answer to that gives us a lot of insight into our human nature. And so if we're driven by, okay, this thing says it's a 45-minute drive and I'm going to get there at 11 o'clock this morning. And if the first thing you think is, well, I can beat 11, I'm going to get there at 10:55.
Mm-hmm.
If we start to acknowledge, okay, what's really important right now? Stop, think, act, review. Stop. Or pause, maybe a better word there. Think about what really is my desired outcome here? What's more important for me to get there safely or for me to get there 5 minutes early and just beat this map on my phone that doesn't care, right? And so I think that that's the key is to give people, a lot of people call them triggers. So when I feel that time pressure, when I see myself distracted, whatever, stop, think, act, review. And that's it's a simple tool, but a powerful tool. And so that's the one we start with in human performance. And then we get into a lot of the other tools. One of my favorite is the verification practices, whether that's peer-to-peer or independent concurrent verification, the checking part of it, because a lot of times too, it's difficult for us to see some of those traps that we fall into, being complacent and whatnot, but it's also difficult for us to catch our own errors when other people can. So that's why checking and verification, both independently and concurrently, I think are so important. So it's that really all that boils down to understanding things that should trigger some action and then providing people with the tools of when they have those triggers. What do I then do about it?
That's great. Let's talk about the importance of job briefings, and if you could kind of elaborate on some of the things that you would encourage people to be talking about during a job briefing.
So the way most people in our industry, 1910-269 is the standard that governs electrical power transmission distribution. And it lists, and it's a good list. I'm not criticizing the standard at all. 5 things you should cover during a job briefing. And I find that people do a really, really good job of covering those 5 things and focusing on making sure that it's documented that they covered those 5 things. So incorporated into that, I like to throw out a list of error precursors. There's a thing in human performance, the twin model of error precursors, twin being task demands, work environment, individual capabilities, human nature. In each one of those categories, there's like 8 things. And I like throwing that out there as part of the job briefing, just saying, what of this do we have going on today? What are we going to do about it? So you're incorporating human factors into your work plan. But with job briefings, the number one thing I would tell people, and where I see them go so wrong, both in how they're conducted and in how they're evaluated, the focus should be on the discussion, communication, and mutual understanding of a work plan and not on the documentation. The way I call it, are we trying to please the system or protect the worker? It pleases the system for us to have the form filled out correctly. It protects the worker. People get mad when I say this, but who cares about the form, right? I mean, it's there for legal reasons and administrative purposes. If you got to do it, you got to do it. But don't let that be the focus. So thing one is focus more on the conversation, the mutual understanding of the work plan rather than getting the form right. And then thing 2 with job briefings is there's no possible way in a 10 or 15 minute discussion before we go to work how we can cover what's going to happen the whole day. And a lot of times I think it's back to we've pleased the system. We've got our form filled out. So what it talks about in the book and what we teach in all of our training is incorporating 2-minute drills and post-job briefings into the pre-job briefing. So it's an ongoing process rather than a one-time event. And then we can, every time we have minor changes or short delays, we do a 2-minute drill, which is basically a team self-check. Stop, think, act, review. Here's what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes. Not here's what we're going to do for the whole day.
Mm.
and it can become very task specific and very, very effective. And if there's major changes or extended delays, then maybe we need to do a whole new job briefing at that point in time. And then the incorporating post job briefings into it after action reviews, some people call them, and just two questions. What could we have done better? We're really good at
Mhm.
that in terms of safety. But HP Principle 4 is so powerful. People achieve high levels of performance because of support, encouragement, reinforcement that they receive from leaders, peers, which is really important right now, and subordinates. And so the other question is, what did we do well that needs to be repeated? And I think a lot of times when you really, really get into what we did well, a lot of times, even when people are getting it right, they're working out a habit pattern, don't know it's right and won't repeat it. But if it's positively reinforced, and
Mm.
again, that's getting people comfortable communicating with each other and incorporating those 2-minute drills. And I call right. You watch a football game. What do they do before every single play? They huddle up. What are they talking about in that huddle? What they're going to do in football terms, literally for the next 4 seconds. So it's great that that football team has the job briefing, their game plan ahead of time. And it's great before the game that the coach says something probably motivational, make sure everybody understands that game plan, the job briefing, if you will. But to me, what's more important is as the game, as your work sites do, changes, as personnel on the field changes, as personnel on our work sites change, whatever else, is that we're constantly having those huddles. And here's what we're going to do, again, football terms, for the next 4 seconds. In our world, here's what we're going to do at this pole, at this house, at this structure for the next 5-10 minutes. Here's all the materials, equipment we need. Here's where you're going to stand. Here's where I'm going to stand. And those can become very powerful discussions. But thinking that 10-minute job briefing, one time event in the morning before we go to work, is going to satisfy our whole day's worth of work and safety planning, that doesn't work.
Mm. Oh, that's a fantastic idea. I haven't thought of that one before. Um, I noticed you mentioning maybe it was on LinkedIn or something. A lot of people don't understand the difference between risk and hazard, and you had some good ideas around that. So could you kind of elaborate on that one a little bit?
So then we're getting into protection and how to protect yourself. And it really is fascinating. And I would encourage anybody listening right now, just go ask yourself and workers and whoever's most exposed to hazards, what the difference between a hazard and a risk is. And it's not really important that people can give you some big, long, fancy definition. The way we try to explain it is this: a hazard is any source of energy. There's a lot of tools out there like the energy wheel that I think help with hazard identification. So if you identify a hazard as a source of energy, and then risk as how much energy there is or could be, along with how long I'm exposed to it, then the mitigation process becomes very logical. And it's all about, first, can I eliminate the hazard, i.e., the source of energy? Second, can I eliminate the risk, my exposure and whatnot? But the step people miss the most is, how can I reduce the energy and the exposure? And that is where some really powerful discussions come from, because the reality is, to do work requires exposure to a hazard and therefore risk. And I think that a lot of times folks just assume, well, it's, and then we just rely on PPE, which PPE is the last line of defense. We all know that, but you go listen to work planning discussions. Almost always it's, here's this hazard. Here's what PPE we're going to put on. We're protected. Let's go to work. So starting with, make it very task specific. Not, for instance, I'm going to work in an excavation today, but my task right now is to install a splice. Yes, I've got to get in the excavation. What if my task right now is to measure how deep the thing is? I can do that without getting in there and therefore remove my risk.
Mm-hmm.
And this really, really applies. I would really challenge people to do this exercise. But when people, the politically nice, correct thing to say, I guess, might be, when I'm in an observation type role, or I'm waiting for you to complete your task so I can complete my next task, whatever. What I like to say is, when people are literally doing nothing, where do they stand in relation to hazards? And it amazes me sometimes how much exposure you can get rid of just for the folks that are in that observation or waiting kind of role, and how close they stand to rotating, moving equipment, under fallen objects, whatever it may be. But if you don't understand the difference between a hazard and a risk, it's impossible to take that second step of, I can't eliminate the hazard. I can't really. A lot of times you can reduce the hazard. You think about
Mhm.
noise. I'm making noise right now. You cut your volume down. You've reduced the energy associated with the hazard. But most folks with that noise, they're perfectly happy if they've got their earplugs in. And we don't think about time, distance, whatever. But if we don't understand the difference between a hazard and a risk, we can't do that. So again, hazard, source of energy, risk, how much energy there is. And almost always there is a way to reduce either the exposure or the amount of energy or the duration of it. So it's an important concept.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to say, David, this probably has been one of the most insightful episodes we've ever done. There's, people I think are going to want to go back and listen to this one twice because you definitely gave us a lot to chew on. So I want to thank you for coming on the show. Is there? I know you do some speaking. I know you've got those books. Maybe let people know where they can either come see you speak or also where they can find your books.
So the books, like anything else in today's world, the easiest way to find them is on Amazon. Frontline Leadership, The Hurdle, Frontline Incident Prevention, The Hurdle, they're there. And then our website, which is ip-institute.com, list all the training programs we have and speaking opportunities and whatnot. So that would be, and that website is referenced and the company referenced in both the books as well. But that's the easy way to find us.
Perfect. No, I'll thank you again, David. It's been great.
I thank you for having me on. I very much enjoyed it.
My pleasure.